Turnpike Jack in the fall of 1979, Marty Joseph was a 23-year-old rookie highway patrolman with the Pennsylvania State Police. Zero's Marty was fresh out of the academy, and before that had been a star football player at Temple University in Philadelphia, before returning to his native western Pennsylvania to attend the State Police Academy. She was tall, stout, and handsome by traditional standards. Zero's dark brown hair that he kept high and tight in accordance with the state police regulations. She had dark brown eyes and a sharp jawline with high cheekbones. She was the envy of all the older officers at his station, many of whom were nearing retirement and jealous of Marty's imposing physique and boyish charms. She had only been at his station for a month and had already gotten quite the reputation for being a real ladies' man. Zero's a patrolman with the Pennsylvania State Police. Marty was stationed out of Ebensburg, Pennsylvania, the county seat of Cambria County. Marty's patrol beat was a 50-mile stretch of Zero's Route 22 between Blairsville and Hollidaysburg, which he considered to be the loneliest road in the state. The other troopers he worked with had given him this particular stretch of highway and the surrounding small towns because they knew it was not an easy place to fill their quota of speeding tickets, especially on the night shift. Though he knew it wouldn't be easy, Marty accepted his route and got after it as best as he could. Marty didn't mind the route because he had grown up just south of us 22 in Johnstown, and contrary to what some might think of a 6'2" former college linebacker, Marty Joseph preferred to leave the excitement on the field. She liked the quiet darkness and loved the idea of being able to navigate the mountains, valleys, and hollers of Cambria County with nothing but his thoughts. During his first few weeks of training on his route, he had been under the tutelage of a few senior officers who had worked it previously. Though he was sure they were just messing with him, he found it odd that they each told him the same urban legend. "Has anyone told you about Turnpike Jack?" Asked Sergeant Kelly. Thomas Kelly was a 54-year-old, soon-to-be retired Irishman who had joined the force after immigrating to the States at the age of 19. Too, had once been an imposing figure in his youth, standing even taller than Marty. However, the years of police work had aged him and worn away much of what used to be muscle. She's a real menace to us stateies, especially out by the old ghost town trail, said Kelly. Marty had heard the story of the supposed phantom of the freeway since he was a kid, but was surprised that these seasoned veteran state troopers would waste their time trying to scare him as an adult. She thought it a little absurd that grown men of the Pennsylvania State Police had nothing better to do than mess with the rookie, but the job could be quite boring, especially in this part of the state, and they needed to find ways to occupy themselves. A girl from the Glow went missing a few weeks back. Just another poor victim of Turnpike Jack, said Kelly. Spready little brunette cheerleader, I think, he added. Just another runaway trying to get away from the tiny coal town of Nantiglow, Pennsylvania. Thought Marty, but it was his last training shift with another officer, so he bit. You think Jack ate her whole or piece by piece? Marty laughed, but Trooper Kelly's face was no longer lighthearted. No. Listen here, boyo. You may not believe in Turnpike Jack, but that demon son of a bitch certainly believes in you. Kelly turned his focus back on the dark stretch of highway. A very awkward silence followed for what seemed like an eternity before he spoke again. Back when we were fully staffed, I had a partner, Robert Ramey. We got called to check out a disturbance on the Ghost Town Trail at one of the old mine sites. He paused. I'm sure you have been briefed on what happened to old Bobby Ramey, he said, knowing the answer. Marty had been. Robert Ramey was murdered and dismembered after their cruiser was run off the road by the Ghost Town Trail, a not-so-popular hiking trail that connected several old mining sites and abandoned communities from the golden age of the coal industry. The trail weaved between the towns of Nantiglow and Ebensburg, following along the Black Lick River. Zeros, Ramey, and Kelly had been reporting to a call when they were struck head-on by what Kelly had remembered as an old black truck. Zeros Kelly was thrown from the vehicle and barely survived. But when he came to after the crash, the only sign of Ramey was a bloody mess. Zero's blood-soaked badge was left sitting at the edge of the trailhead. Zerothi found pieces of him for miles along the trail, but the culprit was never caught. Zerosi don't know what he is. But I know that he is still out there, Kelly continued, but now barely above a whisper. These damn woods are cursed. Zero's his first night on his own, Marty. Joseph found himself repeating the words of Trooper Kelly in his head. That demon son of a bitch certainly believes in you. Zerosight gave him a shiver down his spine, but he had grown up hearing ghost stories of Turnpike Jack and knew they were just that. Ghost stories. Zerothi stories of a community that was ravished by poverty and looking for any excuse as to why so many people just up and vanished, never to be heard from again. Zeros, most of them, he thought to himself, are probably down in Pittsburgh celebrating the World Series and living it up. Zeros 2 weeks earlier, the Pirates had defeated the Orioles in 7 games to take the 1979 World Series, and it was all Marty, a Bucco fan from childhood, could think about recently. Zerothat and Turnpike Jack, of course. Zeros, particularly Kelly's thought that he is still out there. Zeros as he drove his cruiser, a 1979 Dodge Saint. Zeros Regis, up and down his stretch of his 22, Marty found himself trying to find something on the radio to occupy his thoughts. Zeros for a minute he was able to catch a verse and the refrain of the Nax My Sharona. Zero she drummed along on the dashboard. Oh, my little pretty one, but in the foothills of the Appalachians. As people called this part of Pennsylvania, he was lucky to get any radio signal at all. 07, his police radio kicked out more times than not. Zero's likely because this particular stretch of highway was lined with 2,000-foot-tall signal-blocking mountains. Zero's foothills of the Appalachians, my ass. Zero's Marty, shouted at the static on the radio. Zero Seif. These were foothills I'd still be able to pick up, you chats, John. Zeros, he killed the radio and went about his route. Zeros's officer Joseph was coming down into a large holler. He pulled off onto a small one-way road, hoping to flip around and make his way back towards the town of Nantiglow. Zeroshi was surrounded by 40-foot oaks, which in the dark October night resembled thousands of long skeletal fingers reaching up to the moon, hoping to pull it from the sky and illuminate the woods below. Zeroshi decided this was the perfect time to have a smoke. Hell, nothing was going on anyway. Zeroshi parked the Saint. Zeros Regis on the side of the road and pulled out an American Spirit from his soft pack. Zeros 3 left, he thought. Zeros that should get me through tonight. He took a long drag and breathed in a mix of sweet nicotine and crisp fall mountain air. It was sublime. Zeros, after his second exquisite inhale, he realized there was a light up ahead on this little one-lane road in the middle of nowhere. Zeros, it was nearly 3:00 am on a Thursday in late October. Who the hell could be out on this stretch of road at this hour? And why would they be stopped? Zeroshi decided it was his duty as a patrolman to inquire further into this mystery. Zero's Marty took another long drag from his cigarette, then crushed it out and rolled up his window. Zeros, as he approached, Marty decided to kill his lights. Zeroshi figured the most likely culprits were some teenagers, not much younger than himself, sneaking out and trying to hook up. Zerothi last thing he wanted to do was to cockblock some horny locals, so if that's what it seemed to be, he would try to not interrupt them. Zero's Marty pulled the Saint. Zero's Regis close enough to get a better look at what was going on. Zeroth here were 2 cars parked. An older black pickup truck without a license plate. Its low lights on, and just in front of the truck, a bright blue VW Beetle. Zerothi truck was quite rusted out on the bottom. Either that or it had a good deal of fresh mud. Zeros in the low light, he could make out two figures in the back of the Beetle, and he thought to himself, "It really is the love bug tonight." Zeros just as he was about to pull an about-face and let these two lovebirds enjoy themselves. He heard an ear-shattering scream come from the Volkswagen. Zeros Marty turned on his lights and saw what now looked like a violent struggle underway in the back seat. Zeros, the larger figure, seemingly engulfed the smaller one in the back seat, as the low lights of the truck flickered in and out. Zeros, as he instinctively began to reach for his service weapon, a Smith & Wesson. Zeros 357 revolver, with a 6-barrel. He saw a colossal shadow figure drag a young woman out of the back seat of the car onto the ground in front of the truck. Zeroth figures seemed to be that of an extremely tall man, but he was scarecrow-like in his build. Zeroshi was clad in a long black overcoat that hugged his frame tightly, exaggerating what seemed to be all knees and elbows. Zeros Marty noticed this man's skin was so pale it almost seemed translucent. Zeroth, the young woman he had dragged from the car, was a beautiful young blonde, no more than 21 years old if Marty had to guess. Zeroth, the look of complete terror on her face was all he needed to see. "Zeros, put your hands where I can see them." Zeros Marty shouted at the man in the black overcoat. "Zeros, step away from the young lady and put your hands in the air." Zeros the man stepped away from the car and revealed his full height. Zeroshi must have been nearly 7 feet tall and his arms stretched below his knees. Zeroses, he obeyed Marty's command. He revealed long, bony hands, complete with sharp, blade-like talons at the end of each finger. Zerosness and slow, buddy. Zerosi finished at the top of my class at the Academy in Marksmanship, and I won't hesitate to put you down. Zeros Marty was channeling some confidence from his football days, using his tough guy voice, more to convince himself that he was in control of the situation than to actually command the perpetrator. Zerosit was at this point that the giant slicked his jet black hair out of his face to reveal something that made Marty's hair stand on end. Zerosh's skin was white as snow, his eyes blacker than the abyss with a complete absence of light, and it appeared they were devoid of any white at all. Zerothus alone, coupled with the creature's figure, would be enough to haunt Marty's dreams for the rest of what he thought could be a very short life. But the thing that horrified him most was its teeth. Zerothus man, if you could call it that, unleashed an impossible smile, one that literally stretched from ear to ear and from nose to chin, showing what appeared to be dozens of razor-sharp teeth intricately aligned together like the keys on some sick piano. Zero's each fang had to be the size of a kitchen knife. Zero's Marty thought he had to be imagining it. Zero's every instinct told him he should turn tail and book it out of there, but Marty stood firm, transfixed by the grinning ghoul before him, praying that he would live to see another sunrise. Zeroshi was brought back to the situation at hand by another scream from the young lady. "Zeros, fucking shoot him." "Zeros," she pleaded from the ground in front of the beast. Zeros in an instant the smile was gone, and the creature moved at a speed that would rival Barry Allen, snatching up the blonde and throwing her in the back of the truck before Marty knew what was going on. "Zerosi, if you take another step, it will be your last," Zeros Marty exclaimed as he took aim. Zeroth, the next few seconds seemed to move in slow motion as the monstrous tower of a man pounced on Marty. Zeroshi was able to get off a single round from his revolver, which he thought winged the bastard, but if it did, it wasn't enough to slow him down. Zeroshi slammed into Marty with the force of a semi-truck, propelling him several feet into the front windshield of the Saint. Zeros Regis, leaving him momentarily incapacitated and the windshield spiderwebbed, but intact. Zeros, after maybe half a minute of writhing on the hood of the cruiser, he saw the old truck pulling away. Zeros Marty mustered every ounce of strength he had left and hopped in the Saint. Zeros Regis flooring it to try and pursue his assailant. Zeroshi's head was pounding, and he was certain he had at least a half-dozen shattered ribs, but he would be damned if he let Turnpike Jack get away that easily. Zeros Marty needed all 195 horsepower of the Saint. Zero's reaches to catch up to the old truck, and he nearly lost control on the back holler roads more than once. But he was now only about a car's length behind. Zero she tried multiple times to radio for backup, but between the damage the cruiser had taken and the already horrible radio signal, he was out of luck. Zero's Marty decided he was going to ram the truck and try to force him off the road. Zero she floored it again, taking an angle to try and clip the back left of the truck's bumper, forcing him to the right and hopefully into a ditch. Zero's what Marty did not count on was the driver of the truck slamming the brakes at the exact right time to send Marty's cruiser end over end from the direct impact. Zero hanging upside down from his seatbelt, which he must have put on in a haze because it was only around his waist. Marty peered out into the cold, dark night. Zero's vision was fading, but the last thing he remembered seeing before, fading to black, was the distinct silhouette of the slim giant with the black eyes and the razor grin. Turnpike Jack coming his way through the darkness. Zero's when Marty awoke. He found himself having to adjust his eyes to the low light of what appeared to be a cave or cavern. Zero she had an open gash above his right eye which had bled and crusted, impeding his vision even further. Zero, the fact that the blood had already dried meant he had probably been there for a while. Zero's Marty tried to wipe the blood from his eye. He quickly realized his hands had been bound behind his back. Zero she searched his surroundings for any indication of where he might be. Finding a small amount of light resonating from a lantern set up against the cave wall opposite him. Zero's, as his eyes adjusted, he scanned the area in the light, only to behold a sight that turned his stomach and forced a muffled retch. Zero's on the far wall, a few feet from the lantern, was the young blonde. Zero she was dead, ripped open from sternum to navel. Zero's her torso had been emptied of its contents, leaving just a bloody shell. Zero she had literally been gutted. Zero's Marty turned and hacked up everything that was left in his stomach and gasped for breath. Zero's it was then that he heard a sinister cackle coming from the deepest, darkest part of the cave. Zero's out of the darkness rose the form of Turnpike Jack, flashing that same visceral smile, except now his teeth were no longer white, but stained and dripping with red. Zero she stood to his full height and stepped into the light of the lantern. "Zero hungry?" "Zero's?" he asked with a laugh as he gestured toward the body of the young blonde. "Zero's, there's plenty to go around," he said facetiously. Zero's voice, low and raspy. "Zero's, it speaks," Marty said to the creature. "Zero's, does it have a name, or should I just call you Jack?" Zero's, the creature, was amused by this line of questioning, mulling over the words it would choose to share with its soon-to-be prey. Zero's had many names over the centuries. Zero's, he paused, seemingly reminiscing. Zero's, in the old country, they called me Baba Yaga. In London, I was the Ripper. Zero's, down south, I have been called El Coco, but in this place, I am most frequently Turnpike Jack. Zero's, as he spoke, Marty was working on an escape plan. Zero's, luckily, this monster hadn't searched all of his pockets before binding his arms, and he was able to secure his Zippo lighter from his back pocket. Zero, she knew he needed to keep Jack talking long enough for him to burn through the cloth restraints on his hands. 07, if he could manage to free himself. He was pretty banged up, but at least he would have a chance. Zero's, looks like I got you pretty good, huh? Zero's, Marty said as he gestured to a hole in the overcoat darkened with blood. Zerosa, yes. Zerosa, a few inches to the right, and I may have been in some serious trouble. Zerosa, good thing I had a meal ready to rejuvenate me. Zero's, he said as he clutched the hair of the blonde, dragging her corpse closer to him. Zerosa, as the creature did this, a very important thought popped into Marty's head. An old adage he heard as a kid that if it bleeds, you can kill it. Zero's Marty had managed to light the Zippo and was making quick progress on his restraints. Zero, she was almost free, and his thoughts shifted to how he was going to bury this monstrosity. Zero's, what could he use to his advantage against a creature that has survived for centuries eating the flesh of human beings? Zero's, he was searching for answers. It dawned on him that he had been in this place before. Zero's, it wasn't a cave. It was a mine. Zero She was in the belly of the old Lackawanna Iron and Coal Company mine, just south of the now ghost town of Wareham. Zero's Marty lamented the fact that in high school he used to come down here to get high with his buddies, but his youthful transgression may actually give him a chance to survive his run-in with the devil himself. Zeros, it was almost by divine providence that Marty noticed an old MJ carved into the cave wall, barely visible in the lantern light. Zero She had put it there when he was 16 and had brought his then-girlfriend Lucy Gallus down here to do the deed for the first time. Zero's Marty can barely remember losing his virginity that night, but he could never forget the beating he took from her father for taking her into one of the most unstable mine shafts in the eastern United States. Zerothy had shut down several shafts because cave-ins and rock slides had killed dozens of miners over the years. Zero's Marty knew that where he sat was liable to collapse at any moment, and that with the right kind of force he could bring down the roof. Zero's Marty had been pretty unlucky thus far on his first shift, but there was some kind of otherworldly force working in his favor, as just below his carved Mage, barely within the light of the lantern, was his service revolver. Zero She would not have much of a chance and needed enough time to make his move. Zero She tried to stall what he imagined was Jack's plan to dismember and eat him, possibly alive. Zeraso Jack? What are you going to do to me? Zero's Turnpike Jack's black eyes widened, and he flashed that sinister smile again. Zeroswell, officer, I plan to do to you what I did to this lovely young lady. He gestured to the blonde. Zeros, except you, Officer Joseph. I will consume whole. Zero's his smile grew and his dark eyebrows furrowed. Zero's Marty, continuing to stall for enough time to free himself, taunted his captor. Zero's not sure that's possible, even with your big mouth. Zero's, he said, almost daring the creature to prove it could. Zero's it was then that the demon showed itself in its truest form. Zero's Jack's already impossible smile began to grow as he opened his mouth, detaching his jaw and stretching it nearly to the ground. Zero's black eyes rolled over pure white, much like a shark's eyes when it bites into its prey, as he shuffled what was left of the blonde into his now doorway-sized mouth. Zero's at this juncture he resembled a giant anglerfish in more ways than one. Zero's skin, his eyes, his teeth. Zero's crunch. Zero's crunch. Zero's crunch. 3 bites with his megamouth and she was gone, but this was exactly the distraction Marty needed to free himself. He made a beeline for the Smith & Wesson and secured it just as the beast was slurping up the blonde's legs like oversized linguine. He raised the gun at the demon and slowly backed out towards the entrance to the mine shaft, one step at a time, keeping his hand cannon fixed square on Turnpike Jack. Jack laughed. Now that I've fed that little toy won't do much damage. I kind of figured that, Marty retorted, but I'm going a few tons of coal and limestone might do the trick. Turnpike Jack grasped what Marty was planning to do and leered at him with a mix of anger and fear in his eyes. He began his charge, but his movements weren't as explosive as they had been earlier. He appeared to be a bit more sluggish this time around. Marty had theorized that, much like the giant snake that he was when Turnpike Jack consumed his entire blonde victim in 3 bites, he would need to digest her before he could attack with the speed and ferocity he had back on the road. It was a huge gamble to apply some basic biological principles to a creature of nightmares, but in this instance it paid off. Marty had just enough time to expel 4 rounds from the revolver into the ceiling above before Jack could reach him. The shots did their job, bringing the entire shaft down on Jack with a colossal amount of force. Marty was thrown back almost 20 feet from the impact, adding a broken leg to his running list of injuries suffered at the hands of the monster known as Turnpike Jack. He coughed and tried to see through the cloud of debris. The collapse had left him barely able to move, barely able to breathe, and losing a dangerous amount of blood. In his immobilized state, all he could do was crawl, so that is what he did. From his youthful exploits in the mine, he knew it was nearly a quarter mile to the mine entrance, likely another half-mile to the ghost town of Wareham, and yet another quarter mile back to Route 22. Can I make it a mile in this state? Tim thought to himself. He wasn't sure if he would survive, but the knowledge that Turnpike Jack was somewhere behind him, buried in literal tons of rock, gave him the motivation to keep moving up the shaft. As he crawled, he was drifting in and out of consciousness. In his delirious state, Marty had a revelation about the world we live in. If there can be a Turnpike Jack, what other kind of evil can there be in this world? The thought had his head spinning, not just from his probable concussion and loss of blood, but from this new sense of fear, living in a world where the manifestations of our deepest, darkest nightmares could actually exist. As he crawled and climbed further up, Marty tried his best to ignore this thought. He actually preferred to focus on the immense amount of pain that he was experiencing rather than think about the existence of true evil in this world. As he neared the end of the shaft, another thought occurred to Marty. If there was great evil in this world, then there also must be great forces at work for good. He had needed several things to go his way in order to survive his ordeal with Turnpike Jack. Many things that were extremely improbable, but somehow, some way, they had turned out in his favor. He thought back to the luck he had with his lighter, the mine shaft, his gun. All of these things seemed to be just coincidences, but the more he thought about them, the more he thought they were evidence of greater forces at work. After nearly an hour of excruciating pain, he reached the entrance of the mine, only to be greeted by the morning sunrise and something else, something he couldn't believe. It was a tall figure coming towards him, silhouetted by the sun and distorted by the fog of the early morning. It couldn't be Jack, Marty thought to himself. I buried him back there. As the figure approached, Marty tried to prepare himself for battle yet again. He had 2 rounds left in his revolver, and he raised it in front of him, struggling to make out the dark figure as it drew nearer. Is that you, boyo? Marty recognized the familiar Irish accent. Sergeant Kelly? Marty was overjoyed to see the face of his superior cutting through the haze of the early morning. He could tell by the look on the sergeant's face that he must be in pretty bad shape. How? He stuttered. How did you find me? Someone reported a police cruiser engulfed in flames on a back road not far from here. When we realized you were nowhere to be found, we scrambled the troops to come and find you. Don't ask me how, but something told me that I would find you in Wareham. Kelly helped Marty to his feet and threw his arm over his shoulder to help him limp back to the road. What the hell happened to you, boyo? Sergeant Kelly asked as they made their way slowly back to the safety of his Regis. You were going to think I'm out of my mind, said Marty. You may be surprised, replied Kelly. Marty went on to explain his entire ordeal, and Kelly believed every word. Over the next few days, the state police investigated the matter, digging up the old Lackawanna iron and coal mine, looking for evidence of Marty's story, but the only remains were a few bone fragments the coroner speculated belonged to a young female. They never found the blue Volkswagen or the old black truck, nor did they find the remains of a monster straight out of a horror movie. Though he had seen the cave in Barry Turnpike Jack, Marty couldn't help but go back to what Sergeant Kelly had told him. I don't know what he is, but I know that he is still out there.